time. I'd like to thank everyone joining us from across the country today. I'd like to give a special shout out to the Texas Agilistas meetup group who are joining us today all the way from Dallas, Texas. My name is Dalen Walton, and I'm an Agile Engagement Manager here at ICON. I know you might be asking yourself, what's an Agile Engagement Manager? Well, the best explanation I've found that works for people about what I do for a living, indeed what many of us do for a living, is I tell them that I'm a technical marriage counselor. I think that pretty much encapsulates what we do on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes more marriage counseling problems than technical problems, but you kind of get my drift. Feel free to use that anytime you want. Today, we're going to be hearing from Dan James and Mark Ricks as they discuss the safe continuous delivery pipeline, specifically the practice domains under the continuous exploration piece. The future webinars in this series will take the next pieces in order, so we highly encourage you to attend all the sessions to get the most value out of this webinar group. Get right into the presentation. This will be a 30-minute discussion followed by a 15-minute Q&A. And if you have any presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat or in the QA, and we'll try to get them answered either live or online. We have deep experience in all the classes, workshops, and toolkits. Within SAFE, we specialize in a couple of different areas. One is the DevSecOps piece, which we're going to be talking today. Another one is on the executive leadership, coaching, strategy, roadmaps, and OKR section of the piece. So whether you're just starting out and aren't sure what questions to ask, or you've adopted and refined Agile processes for a number of years and looking for what's next, we can help. From basic fundamentals to advanced topics and next generation techniques, we can support your organization at every level along the journey. So why are we listening to Dan and Mark today? Well, in Mark's case, it's pretty simple. For those of you who have taken the DevOps class, Mark wrote it. So I think that's all we need to say about him. So yes, he knows this field very well. Dan has been deep in the trenches working on this stuff for the last 20 years or so, and has spearheaded, I think he's up to 18 end-to-end full Agile transformations.
I'll make it 19 now.
Make it 19 now. So if you've ever had any problems on the actual certification piece of the DevOps class during those questions, blame Dan, because he's probably the guy that wrote those questions. So I can think of no two better people to discuss what we're going to be talking about today than these two gentlemen. And so without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, Dalen. And I'll let Mark start us off.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And thanks, Dalen. Dan, it's really great to be here with you again, doing another one of our things. We do have a history together in the DevOps space. And as Dalen mentioned, I was a primary author of the SAFE DevOps course. Before that, I wrote a course, but I couldn't have done that without your help. We had a lot of fun experimenting with new ideas in the field and coalescing a lot of those experiences into a very early version of that SAFE DevOps course before it was even picked up by Scaled Agile. So we do have a lot of history together, and we've been in the battlefield, and I can't wait to share some of those experiences here and kind of talk about where we came from and what we've learned along the way. So we peel back the layers of this new DevOps model. So let's go to the slide. Here we've got the latest 5.1 big picture. And notice that down there in the lower right-hand corner, we have a new DevSecOps icon. When you click on that DevSecOps icon, it opens up a new 3-page or 3-article series on DevOps and DevSecOps. And our primary, what we call keystone graphic in that set of materials is that meta model there on the right. So what we thought we would do in this webinar is take an opportunity to do more of a deep dive through that graphic. There's a lot there. There's a lot to parse, and we recognize that. It's not a simple diagram, but then again, achieving continuous delivery and doing DevSecOps in complex enterprise environments is not easy. So it's about as simple as we could make it, but there's a lot there. So we're going to go through this model in this webinar series, one aspect at a time, focusing on continuous exploration in this first segment. So that's what we want to do. We want to dive into this model and take this essentially one little wedge at a time, going through continuous exploration, talking about what are the things that we do in DevOps, practices-wise, tool-wise, that contributes to continuous delivery in that upstream part of the pipeline. Dan, anything to add there?
No, you've encapsulated it quite well, sir. Ready to go to hypothesize?
Killer, let's do it.
Let's
Hypothesize.
Let's do this. Hypothetically speaking,
yes. So I'll kind of tee up the theory. We'll I don't know. This could turn into a little bit of an Abbott and Costello routine, but we figured what we'd try here is I would explain the model, talk about what we do in hypothesize and some of these other activities, and maybe talk about the academic portions, right? Talk about it in the abstract and how we present the model from a framework perspective in Scaled Agile, and then leverage Dan's experiences in the field for how we actually do these in real life. So our first stop on the continuous delivery pipeline there in continuous exploration is hypothesize. And this is a very, very critical step in our view of the value stream and in our view of the importance of DevOps. So it all starts with the customer, right? The first thing we need to do is to be able to take those big ideas in from the business, in from the marketplace, dice them down into smaller MVPs, smaller experiments, activate that lean startup cycle, and be able to put these ideas into terms that we can understand and measure and move those through the pipeline as quickly as we can so we can validate our assumptions about those ideas. That's what this hypothesize step is all about. So Dan, why do we need DevOps thinking at this stage, and why do we need to think about agile product management and value metrics and continuous security and continuous quality and value stream management at this level? Seems like a lot.
It does. And in order to have a mature DevOps pipeline with continuous delivery, you can't just think of the continuous integration and continuous deployment components. You have to think of it end to end, concept to cache. And so it requires spending a little more time on how we develop our requirements. You know, from a coaching perspective, the most common pain point that I have observed up here at the epic level, strategic level of the organization is we receive vaguely worded, open-ended requirements with artificial dates assigned to them, due dates, and the dates have been determined before the feasibility is known. And then this is handed down to teams, and they panic and they struggle to get the work done. So the practices and steps in our value stream here that we're building are designed to help us answer some key questions and apply a more scientific approach to delivering value that's fully aligned with the business strategy. So the first question that we would answer here in hypothesize is, what people problem are we trying to solve?
I love your view on this, Dan. As we were talking about this, preparing for the webinar, you laid out your ideas about the linkage between what we're doing here in DevOps and the continuous delivery pipeline and the scientific method. And I love that point of view. Let's get back to science with computer science, right? That's right. Make sure that we understand what we're meant to accomplish here from a business perspective. What are the outcomes that we're driving toward? And how can we ensure that when there's uncertainty about those outcomes, especially when we've never delivered this piece of software before, we've never built this component, we've never built this solution, we're going into it with a lot of unknowns, right? So let's conduct scientific experiments about it, get down to a hypothesis that matters and some measurable outcomes. That's what this hypothesize step is all about. So if we look at that hypothesize wedge there, we call those activities in the pipeline, and kind of draw the boundaries of that wedge in there toward the calmer center, we intersect the practice domains of agile product management, value metrics, continuous security, quality, and value stream management. And what we're pulling out of those practice domains are measurable outcomes and points of view that are connected to the customer, and feeding those into our value stream and packaging those in with the hypothesis so we can carry that experiment all the way through with the right assumptions to help ensure that we're building the right thing.
Yeah, and along the way, we may find that our hypothesis or our theory, scientific theory, is not valid. We may discover based on feedback from customers, for example, that this isn't the approach that we should be following, and therefore let's stop early and not spend any more time and money on going down a bad path. Let's focus and pivot to the correct direction. And
so maybe not every good idea, maybe not every idea is a good idea.
Yeah, it used to be when the boss said, "Hey, this is a great idea," it's because it was his idea, and so that's not necessarily what makes it a good idea. So what we want to do is be able to prove that it's a good idea, and this whole ideation quadrant of our value stream helps us do exactly that.
Cool. So here in DevOps and continuous delivery, we want to drive toward outcomes that matter in the marketplace. And so this hypothesized step is all about getting started on the right foot, right? We're not being driven by the highest paid person in the room. We're not being driven by corporate politics or budgets. It's really what the customers in the marketplace need. What are the needs out there? What do our customers really need in terms of solutions and experiences? Let's bring that in and carry that through the rest of the cycle. So great, that's hypothesis. Should we move on to collaborate and research?
Yeah, let's go on.
All right, collaborate and research. So here, again, if we take a slice through that model, we're going to intersect several of these practice domains. So we're going to pull in technical practices and perhaps even tooling from these areas. We're talking agile planning and design, and agile product management, value metrics, again, continuous security, again, continuous quality. Again, we're already starting to see a pattern where we're maintaining a perspective on some of these practice domains all the way through the pipeline, right? We're never taking our eye off the security ball. We're never taking our eye off of the quality ball and value stream management. So here in Collaborate and Research, what we teach in SAFE and what we write about in the framework associated with Collaborate and Research is partnership around really understanding the product market fit. So at this point, okay, we have a great idea. Somebody said that if we build it, this will be great for the company or this will be great for the marketplace, right? Let's go validate that. Let's go talk to some real customers. Let's do some research. Let's do some design thinking around it. Let's be collaborative about this. Let's talk to as many people as we can in the right places at the right times who can help validate some of these assumptions and give us an idea of what the market really needs from this idea before we go and start to model or build anything.
Yeah, from a coaching perspective, this would be our second question now in the value stream is how do we know that the people problem that we defined in the previous step is actually a real problem. And so the research we need to do needs to validate that problem, that it really is one. And in order to be lean, we must outlearn the competition so we can out-improve the competition. Thus, our research needs to also be competitive and listening to the customers, but also have our competition already solve this problem. If so, now we have a build or buy decision that we could make. Do we need to build something, or is it so strategic to us that we need to build it? And we can use external data here, of course. We can even use design sprints to get feedback, early feedback from end users, so we can quickly gather the evidence that we need to know that this is a real problem that needs solving. And that would include the customer experience itself. Is it once we've solved this problem, is it going to be easier to use? Is it going to be more intuitive? So it's doing just enough research and collaboration with our customers and internal stakeholders, and just in time research. Because if we base the development of this solution on a year-old research, it is probably obsolete by now and probably has already been solved by our competition.
Yeah, I love what you said about just-in-time research there, yeah, right? We need to do some collaboration and research. We need to do some design thinking. We need to do some market analysis, but we're not going to do big upfront analysis, right? This isn't a phase in a project lifecycle. This is just-in-time activation of a collaboration in that market space to glean what we need to know right now to move forward, recognizing that there's still a cone of uncertainty here, right? We don't need to have everything laid out up front in order to move forward. We're going to continue to learn along the way, but let's have conversations with our customers directly through maybe focus groups or Gemba. Let's talk to business owners and stakeholders and product owners and teams themselves to get their take on the solutions, system architects and engineers, solution architects, whoever we need to talk to quickly and just in time to get a feel for the product market fit here. What is the product vision? What are our customers' needs? And what's sort of the technical feasibility of moving forward this kind of an idea? And that's going to intersect those domains. This is where we start to get into some agile planning and design. So things are going to start to appear in backlogs. Some minimum marketable features are probably going to start to materialize here. We're going to pull from agile product management through design thinking, some of those metrics, leading indicators, even some lagging indicators that we want to track, bringing in those value metrics and focusing on outcomes and OKRs. What are the things that we're really going to measure, and maybe even setting some targets here, right? Maybe upstream we identified some of those metrics we want to track, but here we're establishing some hard targets and thresholds, and probably even looking at some non-functional requirements at this point.
Right. And so our third question that this step helps us answer is, how will we know if we have actually solved the problem? And so basically what Mark has listed are many of the things that help us do that. Have we included compliance and security concerns? How are we going to test this solution when we think we're done? In other words, how are we going to prove that we're done? What telemetry are we gathering in the application itself? And what is the least amount, what we might call minimum viable architecture? What's the least amount of architecture that we need to either build or comply with in order to make this a viable solution? And in order to make that happen, architects need to be involved in the entire ideation process from top to bottom. During this continuous exploration, leaders need to be getting input on feasibility and the high-level constraints that we may be under from an architecture perspective. And then, architects all the way down to the system level that are working directly with the teams need to be able to provide input, because they are closest to the actual technology and are able to provide input to the enterprise level architects. So it may require that we have to do some architectural runway work before this thing can be released in order to make it viable. And so just enough architecture thinking up front is what's needed. Again, this is not the big design up front thing. We're talking at the model level, not at the detailed architecture level, because the details will emerge as the teams begin developing.
Perfect. Let's click into architect and see how let's look at the layers there.
Oh, sorry, I hadn't gone into that one yet, but they're almost the same. Yeah, they're almost the same.
Right. We're seeing a pattern. So we're in each of these steps, we're keeping value stream management in mind. We're thinking about the value stream, right? What is the process from end to end, and what are maybe some of our SLAs? How fast do we need to develop this and bring it to market? What kind of time horizons do we have? And maybe that links into our funding and budgeting model, right? We only have so many days or iterations or so much time and money to get this out the door. So let's be thinking about our value stream and how long we have for each step here. How long do we have to really bring this to market? Quality and security, sure, comes into focus from an architecture point of view, right? Architects need to be thinking about the quality of the models, the quality of the solutions that are coming together, partnering with security on things like early security assessments and threat models at this point. Again, not too much of a deep dive. We're not getting really into the thick of it, into the weeds with detailed models, but let's do just enough analysis here, right? And threat modeling is a great tool to bring into focus here with architects in collaboration with information security, cybersec professionals. And bringing that in, and now we're starting to talk about some new areas, right? We've got configuration management, which is really the idea that everything is code. Security is code, and architecture is code, and infrastructure is code. The architects might actually be modeling some things out and creating some software, maybe some frameworks, maybe some libraries, maybe even scripting out some environment configurations, getting those into version control. So these are starting to appear now in the model as a little bit more technical, more concrete, maybe some of the things that we more naturally associate with DevOps and DevSecOps coming into focus here at the architecture step. But again, the focus is on doing it fast, not too much up front, but producing real artifacts, real assets, and getting them into version controls so they are reusable downstream. But Dan, when we were talking about this before, we were talking a lot about testing at this stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the architects need to understand how this is going to be tested and make sure that the environments and the tooling necessary to do a proper job of testing is in place. And the testing isn't limited to the functionality of the solution. It goes way beyond that into what tests would we run to guarantee continuous security? What tests would we run to prove to an auditor that we are compliant? What tests would we run to ensure that our architecture is sound? That it's not just the functionality of the customer's experience, but the functionality of our stack, and ensuring that we have a robust solution as we migrate and begin developing the solution and it's going downstream, that everything is in place for us to be able to get this done with low time to market.
Right. And I really dig that idea, right? We should be thinking about testing all the way through this. That's why we have a continuous quality practice domain that circles the entire delivery pipeline. Everybody at every level through every activity here in the pipeline should be thinking about quality. And anybody who's writing a requirement, especially here upstream, should be writing tests as well, right? Let's make sure that those ideas are not just written down as requirements and thou shalt or system shall do this, but actually instrument those as tests. And even better yet, if we can actually get those into tooling or scripts where they can be automated easily downstream. So yeah, the architects here should be thinking about not only requirements, probably non-functional requirements are going to come into play very heavily here at this stage, but let's have those architects not just writing those non-functional requirements down, let's have them actually scripting out the tests so that they're easy to execute later on. Same with collaborate and research, right? The people involved there, usually product management, product owners, human-centered design professionals, HCD comes into play here. And I've learned that in the last few weeks. There's a lot to do from an HCD perspective here in continuous exploration. Thanks, Joe. And UI, UX people, right? Let's think about what the customer's needs and let's codify those as actual tests rather than just requirements. So great, that's architect. So at this point, we've taken that business idea, that grand idea, we've chunked it down into something more manageable, like a minimum viable product, de-risking that process to make sure that the assumptions that we go in are going to be validated as quickly as they can be in a production environment with live people, with feedback we need from the marketplace to make sure that if we need to pivot, we can pivot fast without a lot of sunk costs. So we hypothesize, we collaborate and research to grind that idea down into a product market fit. Architect for just enough at this point, right? We're not architecting for the finished solution, but we're architecting for that minimum viable product, and we're architecting for operations just as much as we're architecting for a viable solution, right? So all of that is continuous exploration. We're exploring the space, we're exploring the problem space, we're exploring the solution space. And we've activated a lot of roles in a lot of different places to go explore things. Well, the synthesize step We could flip to that. There's my magic segue.
There you go.
Synthesizing is distilling all of that exploration down into an actionable backlog, right? This is where we get to brass tacks about what we've learned in that exploration process and funneling it into a backlog, and a prioritized backlog for the next segment, which is continuous integration. So Dan, what are your thoughts here on synthesize?
Well, coaching is, coaching this step is knowing the sequence of development work that ensures the most bang for the buck, which goes to prioritization. So we want to deliver a high quality customer value in the least amount of time. What is the best sequence of development work that we can put in our backlog in order to make that happen? So as a coach, I would ask, are we breaking down the epics into their smallest vertical deliverable slices into features that then allow the teams to break them down even further? Are all the architectural compliance and security concerns that were addressed in the previous step now part of our definition of done for these features? Any testing that needs to happen is now a little more granular, but we have brought down that architectural requirement that's still at a fairly model level, high level. We're now getting it broken down into the details. And we need to have a clear definition of done that's testable. That's usually the first question I like to ask product managers and architects is when they hand me a new feature, whether it's a business feature or an enabler, I want to ask them, how should we test this? How do we know this is done? And then make sure that our acceptance criteria includes the necessary tests, hopefully already scripted and ready to go. And this should also include our definition of done. Are we embedding the necessary telemetry to capture our business leading indicators that we identified earlier and any technical metrics that we know of? So we've made the right decision and we'll be able to prove it. Have we made the right decision as we're building this or starting to deploy pieces of it? Let's get those leading indicators feeding us that acknowledgement that we're going in the right direction so we don't waste time and money on it. And the other thing that comes out of this step is, do the teams have enough information to further break down the work into those bite-sized chunks that are crystal clear and also testable? And is everything visible? All the work and its breakdown and its sequencing and its flow, is that all set up in a tool and made visible so that we can then mitigate or prevent risks of release and make sure that we've identified as many of those as are known up front? So that when we start breaking down the work and actually executing, we already have plans in place to take care of those biggest risks. And then the last thing that we deal with going into a program increment planning is, do we have the capacity to accomplish all of this? With the highest initial quality, leaving no technical debt on the table, what would that cost us? How much capacity of our people, because they're the factory, they're the knowledge workers that are building this. And our support as leaders of that work, we need to understand their capacity and not over allocate, any work. It's kind of like being in rush hour on the freeway. If there's no gap between the cars, nobody is happy. Mm-hmm. And so we have to give them the slack necessary for them to be creative and innovative and exploratory in getting the right solution. There might be 20 proper solutions for this. It's up to the teams to determine which one is best in our context. So those would be some of the leading coaching concerns I would have here.
Great. Yeah, it's all about preparing for implementation, right? Do we have our ducks in a row? Are our bases covered? And do we have alignment through the teams, through the arts? When we teach the class, we teach that one of the goals of continuous exploration, one of the meta objectives here, is alignment among everybody in the value stream. Are we all aligned on the value proposition here? Are we all aligned on the minimum viable product, what we're set out to do? Have we scoped it well? Do we understand the requirements? Do we understand what's being tested? Do we understand what's going to be measured? And do we understand what we as individuals, whatever role we play in the pipeline, do we understand what we're going to accomplish here from a bigger picture perspective, from a customer-centric point of view? So all of that exploration needs to get funneled down into focus, 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 and a plan that we can execute on very, very fast, right? In order for that to happen, especially when we started with a really, really big idea that may work, it may not work, but it's fuzzy and maybe it's a one-liner somewhere, we had to get from that into a focus backlog where we had everybody in the value stream aligned on what we're trying to accomplish together so that we can run as fast as we can into that validation phase where we can learn about our assumptions, validate that hypothesis, and connect back to the actual needs of our customers. So the synthesized step is a very, very critical step in that exploration process where now we're getting down to brass tacks and we have information codified in the system. It's ready. It's you mentioned some tools there. So in our Agile planning and design band, we have things like Agile product management tools, our backlogs, our backlog items. So we mentioned epics and features and stories. Do we have those in place and are they populated, right? How many times, Dan, have you seen a backlog full of backlog items that don't have any detail?
Right.
Or
some of them
the
barely
flip
have a
side,
title. Yeah, some just barely a title.
too much detail. Right?
Yeah,
So
or
the back,
yeah.
do we have a backlog? Is it prioritized? And does it have just the right level of detail to keep the process going? So that's what we're talking about here in the synthesized step. And it's going to cross those domains. But here at this level, we're looking for very concrete evidence that we have a plan, we have a design, we have things in configuration management, we have the scripts, or we have maybe shells of scripts or templates of scripts that we know we're going to come into play. We have a version control system and we have things in version control that maybe we're going to reuse, or we know which assets we need to populate in version control. We have our branches created, or at least we know where our branches are going to be. And hopefully those are going to be very short-lived branches. And we've looked at continuous security. We know where our tests are, and our tests are already baked into those backlog items, right? We're not going to write the tests later. We're going to start with the tests, and then we're going to implement. And that goes for security too, right? Do we have those security policies in place? Do we know where our potential vulnerabilities and attack vectors are? Have we thought about those going into development? And have we socialized all of this with everybody? And do we have a solution vision? Is it on a roadmap? And do we have economic prioritization of the things that we know we need to do first? Ruthless prioritization of that backlog because we have a job to do. It connects back to that hypothesis. We're not going to boil the ocean, right? That's how we get things done very, very fast in the DevOps world. So we have to take those big ideas and synthesize them down into very concrete nuggets that we can move through the system as quickly as possible, and then lather, rinse, repeat.
Would you guys like to open up for some Q&A?
Sure.
Let's do that.
The first question comes right through to the synthesis part. Given that definitions of done are predominantly focused on technical delivery, what upstream artifacts within a value stream could be considered synthesis? This is something we need to consider when we're creating DoDs for non-technical delivery teams.
Okay. When we talk about synthesis here, the actual practice is breaking things down, into its smallest possible size so that we can enhance the flow, the lean flow of work. So when I receive a requirement, and let's say it's a technical requirement, there are usually many moving parts to that requirement. And each of those moving parts can be sliced away from the overall request and broken into its absolute smallest vertical size. And it allows teams to divide and conquer and get work done. It also allows for better work in process management, WIP management during the development. It also makes it much simpler to test, because I have to only test a small piece of it at a time. I don't have to test the overall thing until we get down into end-to-end testing, integrated testing. So that's how I look at the real value of synthesis is taking big, vague ideas and converting it to pretty concrete, small pieces that we can actually execute.
Thank you, Dan.
Mhm.
Moving on to the next one. We're curious to hear Dan elaborate on design sprints and how that fits in the SAFe framework. The author says he's used these to great results, but he always felt a little wrong when he did it.
Well, what we don't want to do is big design up front. But sometimes if you have vague, very vague requirements and you're struggling in that collaborate and research step, sometimes it is useful to go ahead and spend a little time with customers or end users if they're like internal users, and spend some time going through the new things, the new features or the new ideas that we're trying to implement here that we think will solve a problem, and use a design sprint. It might be just a 2-week period with those end users and actually listen to them and spend that extra time. I don't want to use this as a design phase, per se, and that's why you would feel uncomfortable using that term, because in waterfall we would go through long design phases that would then be obsolete by the end. What we're talking about is short little periods of time before we commit to breaking this down into work items, is figure out, are we on the right track just from the idea perspective, and get some initial feedback from customers. Hey, if we gave you this new functionality and we made it simpler to use than it is now, is this something that you could, you'd be delighted with? And getting that level of feedback. We're not talking about, major design, but it might require a little bit of UX, show some wireframes to end users and say, is this an improvement over what you've been using? And spend that time as needed. Not all epics need that level of design work, but we want the thought process to be, pretty clear as to what the solution needs to be without pre-designing it or trying to define the how.
Thank you, Dan. Another question here. You talked about having tests baked into the acceptance criterias. Can you exemplify? Can you expand a bit on that, on more on test and acceptance criteria specifically?
I would go to behavior-driven development as one of the key methodologies here, and that is where we take our primary tests. We think and vision from a business perspective, the end user's perspective, how we would test their experience with this product, and we would write it in given, when, then format. So behavior-driven development is basically taking a series of scenarios that we have written in this format. Given this initial state, when this trigger occurs, then this must be the outcome. It can be written in plain business language, in your organization's language. And then the developers and the QA people working together can take that and create actual tests in the code to test that very English. And once it's in that format, it's now very easily automatable. So now we don't have to keep doing manual testing on that particular piece of business functionality, because we've already built an automatable behavioral test for that function. And you can include negative tests, edge cases, all the various nuances, and have multiple scenarios. And because it's so simply and clearly written in business language, not in technical speak, it can be actually included as acceptance criteria in features and stories in the backlog. And it's usually either an attachment as a .feature file. That's the format that we use for Gherkin, just a pickle. That's why we use Cucumber as a tool. But it allows us to have literally executable specifications. You write those scenarios once, it can be used as documentation, as acceptance criteria, and as evidence during an audit of what the system is actually doing, because it actually is a test. So it has multiple purposes. With one level of effort, you get 3 different benefits.
All right, the next one.
Plus 1,000 on the BDD idea.
There you go, for sure.
Hugely
Then
powerful.
the
Yeah.
next question, I think this would go to Mark, and this has to deal with the future roadmap of SAFe and DevOps. So this is a two-parter. One, will SAFe create a standalone security certification to be combined into a DevSecOps certification? And the second question goes to the old DevOps Health Radar. Now with this new continuum, is the old Health Radar out of scope?
Yeah, very good question. So the first question was about DevSecOps and whether we were going in a very specific direction there with maybe training and certification. So we did a lot of our own exploration last year, 2020, in the area of DevSecOps, and a lot of that exploration, that discovery, generated new ideas and new experiences in the field and experiments with the technical course. Maybe some of the folks who were on this webinar were actually part of that sort of pre-alpha prototype of the lab-based DevSecOps course that we put through. I know, Dan, you were involved in that.
Mhm.
So we learned a lot of things, and one of the major drivers of that effort was getting deeper into DevSecOps, more of the technical practices with a focus on security, right? Because yeah, we follow the party line, and we know what's happening out there in the DevSecOps community, and security is a very, very major concern, right? We can't do DevOps without thinking about security. So we had to get a little bit more serious about our work there in the security space, and we experimented with some creative naming. Are we gonna move from DevOps to DevSecOps? Or are we gonna create a DevSecOps course and a certification? Well, through all of that exploration, what we landed on was no, we're not going to make any changes. DevOps is DevOps, and security is just baked in. So you'll find that in our latest framework guidance. Go to scaledagileFramework.com, click on that DevSecOps icon in the big picture. That'll open up that new landing page that is the first in a 3-part article series on DevOps. That landing page explains our view on DevSecOps, and basically the abbreviated version is we recognize the importance of security, but in SAFe, security is just built in. We don't call it out specifically, just like we don't call out compliance as being a major factor, architecture being a major factor, testing being a major factor, or operations being a major factor, right? So DevOps is DevOps, but we bake security in just with everything else. So there won't be a separate security related certification, but we will continue to strengthen and reinforce our existing guidance in the areas of security and other domains as well. So that's the first one. The other one is, hey, what about that DevOps Health Radar that kind of looks like this meta model? Well, they're not mutually exclusive. So we continue to use the DevOps Health Radar. They both exist. They both continue to exist. They're but for different purposes. We encourage folks to continue to use that DevOps Health Radar for assessment purposes. It's a radar chart. So do a maturity assessment of your DevOps capabilities and do ongoing assessments, and use that DevOps Health Radar to chart your course through your DevOps transformation. It's a different tool. It looks similar to this, but it's a different tool. But both are still very, very relevant.
Yeah, and it will actually help feed your assessment with more clarity, because we now have these practice domains inside of this chart, and your assessment score for each of the steps may now be affected by the lack of any of these practices that you see on this one. So, hey, we're not doing continuous security very well. Well, that may now affect a score where you were almost ignoring that one before doing the assessment. So now this will actually help inform your assessment using the radar chart.
And looks like we're almost at time, but we have a juicy one for the last one. It looks like there's a lot of activities that should be done during the continuous exploration piece. Now, this is I know this is going to be a depends question. What's the typical lead time from hypothesize until we start to implement? We often find ourselves in situations where the epics and features are just getting too big. I think that's the common experience across many companies that are going through this right now.
Yeah. Cut it thin, make each epic. I would rather have 5 epics to satisfy a particular strategic direction than have it all in one epic. But in either case, any epic needs to have a minimum viable product. And I've also seen scope creep on those, on the minimum viable product. They, companies like to start gold plating a minimum viable product, which defies the term. It needs to be, what is the minimum? Here's a key quick example. Financial services company that I spent a year at here in Fort Worth. They had to adhere to a brand new regulation that was crammed down from government with very short notice to all financial services companies. It was called Reg BI. And the problem with it is because of the short nature of it, there was not enough time to build a robust technology to comply. What we ended up with is an MVP that was just way too big to meet the deadline. And so we had to, as coaches, we had to keep going back to the client, having them, let's determine what is the absolute minimum that we can put out there that will comply with the regulation, the letter of the law, without worrying about whether it has great looking feathers on it, And once we got to that point, we realized we only needed to actually build a couple little pieces of technology. Everything else would remain in its previous manual state until later when we've passed the deadline, and then we can incrementally make things pretty. The key was, what is the absolute minimum to meet that minimum compliance? And once we determined that, then the workload dramatically reduced and we were able to meet the deadline.
If I could attempt to put a stake in the ground here just really quickly, we see a lot of our customers, which are big enterprises, right? So larger solutions, and it's harder for some organizations that are involved in very, very large solutions, very large ideas to chunk this down into 24-hour increments, like companies like Amazon do, right? So if you're not web scale, if you're not that kind of company, and it takes you longer to get through a pipeline like this, a decent starting point for a lot of our customers who are doing safe are to run this continuous exploration set of activities, one PI ahead of the implementation activities. So give yourself maybe one PI or one quarter's worth of runway if you need it to do this exploration, but also recognizing that this isn't a linear model. These don't need to be done in this sequence. The people who are doing architecture are always doing architecture. It's not just when they get handed a set of minimal marketable features from the people who are doing collaborate and research, right? This is a perpetual motion machine, and the people and the roles and the teams that are doing these, whether they're design sprints or architecture sprints or product management sprints or Gemba activities, these should always be running. So continuous exploration happens all the time, but have a look at the horizon and anticipate where the work is coming. And if you need to be a PI or a quarter ahead of the implementation efforts, use that to kind of gauge your cadence. But then move faster and faster from that point. Maybe moving from a PI to a month to an iteration.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. We are a couple of minutes over. I want to thank again everyone for joining us today. You will be getting a copy of the recording to this for everybody that registered. I want to thank Mark and Dan for their incredible, brilliant brains and letting us steal a little bit of their mojo for this presentation. Remember, this is just.
We lost you there, Dalen.
Well, here's how Icon can help.
Yeah, we lost Dalen's audio there. Yeah, so there are many services that Icon can provide, including assessments. We do quite a bit of those fairly often because companies just don't know where they are in the maturity level of their DevOps pipeline, and sometimes they need some coaching. Just also understand that a company that's just starting out and adopting SAFe, fairly early, there is no such thing as a fast, safe transformation. In order to be successful, it takes, many months. The average is around 2 years before you start seeing, all the benefits. You're going to start seeing some benefits right away if done properly. And make sure that continuous delivery is included in that transformation so that you can actually see value delivered with better quality and in less time, and some of the benefits of DevOps. It's like the Gartner group has said, just within the last year or so, they said that there is no 3 separate conversations between project team, Agile, and DevOps. It's all one conversation. And, they all go together and need to, be part of the thought process of being an agile organization.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Are you glad I said it for you?
I am. And thank you again, everybody. Sorry for my technical problems with my headset here. If you have any questions on anything that we've covered, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to have discussions. Also, go look on the Scaled Agile website for the practice domains that we covered today and we'll be covering in future webinars. Thank you all again for attending, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.